Valentine's Day 1988, the body of 20-year-old Lynette White was found in a flat above a betting shop in the docks area of Cardiff. She had been violently attacked and stabbed more than 50 times. The crime scene at James Street was a desolate flat, with arterial blood spray on the walls and only containing a dirty mattress and a box full of used condoms. There were traces of evidence in this case that were left undiscovered for over a decade, and it was one of the biggest miscarriages of justice in the UK. Lynette is described as a bubbly and pretty young girl, but had problems since early childhood and appeared to have no guidance in her life. At the time of her murder, she was working as a prostitute in the docks area of Cardiff. This case was infected by racism and corruption, with witnesses being bullied by police to provide false confessions. A suspect was seen outside the flat with blood-stained clothes. He was a white man, but all the men police arrested were black. There were 5 men in total: cousins John and Ron Actie, Youssef Abdullahi, Stephen Miller and Tony Paris, who became known as the Cardiff Five. There wasn't a shred of evidence linking any of these men to the murder of Lynette, eventually leading to their cases being overturned at a court of appeal. John and Ron Actie, who spent 2 years in custody on remand awaiting trial, were acquitted of the murder, but the 3 other men were found guilty. In 1992, the Court of Appeal determined a gross miscarriage of justice as there was a significant lack of evidence and the confessions had been forced. The convictions of the 3 men were overturned after they had spent 2 years in prison for a crime they didn't commit. 11 years after the murder, police launched a last-ditch attempt to find Lynette's killer and brought in an expert team of forensic scientists to help solve the case. Lynette's case has significantly changed the way forensics is used to solve crimes that appear unsolvable. There was no forensic evidence linking anyone to the murder of Lynette White, so the forensics team looked to bring some new evidence that could shed light on the case and provide answers not only to her family, but to the men that were wrongly accused for her murder. The first thing the forensics team was asked to do was review the initial investigation made by the crime scene officers at the time of the murder. And the first thing they noticed was the lack of understanding of what the blood patterns in the flat could tell them about the attack. The patterns gave them enough to know where the attack started, where Lynette had had her throat cut, how her body was moved, and where the main bulk of the attack took place. What it doesn't show is how the attacker got out of the apartment after brutally murdering 20-year-old Lynette. There was a lot of blood at the crime scene, mostly belonging to Lynette, but there was some blood that belonged to another person. In the original investigation, it appeared that the blood belonged to a female friend of Lynette's who had falsely testified being a witness to the murder. Testing the sample again a year after the murder indicated the other blood actually came from a male, as it contained the Y chromosome, which is only present in male DNA. So who did this sample belong to? The main focus of the forensics team was to ensure a full DNA profile for the male was developed by finding more blood from the offender. This was a violent and long attack, so it was unlikely that the killer left the scene unscathed and without injury. The original investigation involved the entire flat being searched for fingerprints. Police at the time used a chemical called ninhydrin, which visualises fingerprints on different surfaces. The wallpaper where the arterial spray had been seen was coated with the chemical, and unfortunately for the forensics team, ninhydrin destroys DNA and can't be used for analysis, so the team had to look through the crime scene to find blood that hadn't been affected by the ninhydrin. The expert forensics team returned to the crime scene to look for any evidence that may have been missed, or because techniques weren't available at the time, there wasn't a way to suitably retrieve a sample. They took a multitude of measurements and left with a clear understanding of the room where the attack took place. This allowed them to fully recreate the crime scene using the blood-stained wallpaper that was taken into evidence more than a decade earlier. They analysed the blood patterns on the wallpaper to identify how someone would move around during the attack, to see where they should target to look for more DNA. It was clear to the team that this was a frenzied attack, and that Lynette had tried to fight off her attacker. They assumed that the knife used would have been covered in Lynette's blood, and would have become too wet and slippery for the killer to handle properly, and their hand could have slipped down the handle and onto the blade, causing blood from the attacker to transfer to other areas in the apartment. They found cellophane from the top of a cigarette packet on the floor in the flat, covered in blood, and as there was no talk of anyone smoking in the flat, they identified that this blood had to have come from the attacker, branding him to the police and the forensics team as Cellophane Man. When the team analysed the blood from the cellophane, they found an almost full DNA profile of a male. Some members of the police force were convinced that the Cardiff Five still had something to do with Lynette's murder, so the DNA profile found on the cellophane was compared to each of the men originally charged with her murder, and it didn't match to any of them, clearing them of any involvement in Lynette's death. To make things more difficult, the apartment had been redecorated multiple times after Lynette's murder, and whilst analysing evidence and recreating the crime scene, the forensics team identified another target area to look for DNA was on the skirting board close to where Lynette's body was found. They wanted to bring the skirting board into the laboratory for analysis, so had to ask the landlord if they could remove the board and take it into evidence. Looking at the skirting board under the microscope identified that it had been painted over at least 3 times, making it a painstaking task for the forensic officer to remove the layers to see if there was any blood left behind. There was also the potential that the blood could have been wiped away before redecorating, so after days of careful removal of the paint, they were able to see that the blood had in fact been painted over and not cleaned away. They also realised that the area where the skirting board was taken from was not completely aligned with the wall, and there could have been some blood that had dripped down the wall behind. The blood from the skirting board and the wall behind it matched the profile found on the cellophane wrapper. At the time of the attack, there was no electricity supplied to the room, and the light in the hallway was broken, so the killer would have had to manoeuvre themselves in the dark to get out of the apartment and onto the street. Following the path that the attacker would have taken, they found more blood on the walls in the hallway and also on the front door to the apartment building, all matching to the DNA sample taken from the cellophane. The blood on the front door was also mixed with Lynette's, providing a direct link to Cellophane Man and Lynette's murder. To further solidify the evidence for the case, the team next looked at Lynette's clothing. During the attack, Lynette would have been manhandled in a particular way, so the experts recreated the attack with a similar sweatshirt and jacket to the one Lynette was wearing. Her arm had been pulled from the sleeve of her jacket and dragged across the front of her body, signalling a struggle, and that the killer must have grabbed onto the sleeve to move Lynette around. They focused on the cuff of that sleeve and again found offender DNA that matched the Cellophane Man. This was the biggest breakthrough on the case in 14 years, and the police felt like they were close to catching the man responsible for the brutal murder of Lynette White in 1988. They needed to identify Cellophane Man, but when they ran the sample through the national database, there were no matches. So they decided to run a mass screening programme of the population in the area to see if they could find a match, but this was also unsuccessful. They then decided to perform a familial DNA test, looking for anyone that may be a blood relative of Cellophane Man, by focusing on people in South Wales who had a rare component found in the DNA sample. That gene was FGA27, and when run through the database a second time, there were 600 profiles that came back as a match. The sample was then further analysed for other similarities, and one match came back from the database. It was from a 14-year-old boy who was already in the database for a misdemeanour crime. As he was not born at the time of the killing, the police knew that Cellophane Man was most likely a relative of the young boy. They tested the father, and although it was a close match, it wasn't perfect. And after more investigation, it was revealed that the boy's father had a brother that had been a recluse for years and rarely had contact with the family. The brother's DNA was a perfect match to Cellophane Man, and his name was Geoffrey Gaffar, a security guard living outside of Cardiff. Police put Gaffar under surveillance as they needed time to prepare for the interviews and put everything in place to catch the man that had murdered Lynette decades previously. During the surveillance, police officers see Gaffar entering multiple shops buying paracetamol tablets. The amount that he was buying alarmed police as they were concerned he was going to do something drastic. They were given the signal to approach him, and when they did, he said to officers, "I've been waiting," and told them he had taken more than 60 paracetamol tablets. He was rushed to hospital where they managed to save his life and then took him into custody. The large amount of DNA evidence against Gaffar brought police the confession they were looking for, and after more than 15 years, in 2003, Geoffrey Gaffar admitted to killing Lynette in court and was sentenced to life in prison. The forensics case against Gaffar took 4 years to build, and this was the first case to use familial DNA analysis to identify a suspect in a murder case. This has brought justice and answers for Lynette's family, and for the Cardiff Five, who were subject to one of the worst miscarriages of justice in UK history. If you like this video, don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more interesting case files, and let me know in the comments if there are any cases you would like to see on the channel. Thanks for watching and stay safe.